Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Corey Thornton. I am the managing editor for Market Intelligence at Open Minds. Today, as part of our weekly executive web forum series exclusively for elite members, Open Minds Senior Associate Joe Naughton-Travers will walk you through how to assess the feasibility of your strategic plan and implement it to build long-term sustainability. Mr. Naughton-Travers has over 30 years of experience in the health and human services field, focusing on strategic planning, metrics-based management, technology selection, contract negotiations, and strategic alliances. And before we get started, we have a couple of housekeeping reminders. Your audio will be muted during today's briefing, but we welcome your questions and comments via the question box on the right side of your screen. You can send in your questions throughout the briefing, and Mr. Naughton-Travers will address them at the end. The slides and the recording from today's briefing will be available on the Open Minds website by tomorrow. And with that, Mr. Joe Naughton-Travers.
Thanks so much, Corey, and to our team members at Open Minds. Listen to our audience. First of all and foremost, hopefully you're safe and your families are safe and your bubble is safe. You know, what we've been doing for months now at Open Minds is helping people move, our major customers and those of you in our circle, move forward with planning and managing the crisis that we're currently in, the current pandemic. So today's presentation is actually the second part of a presentation I started, I think it was a month ago, about strategic planning. So Monica and I often talk about we have to get through the crisis, but we also have to be thinking about what are we going to be doing 12 months from now, 24 months from now. So today's presentation is really more about implementation, but I do want to review some of the basic constructs. So, you know, the big picture is obviously strategy matters. It's about planning for the future, planning for the current market, and planning for how we get there from here. It's very different in 2020. You know, I've had the luxury of working with 3 major customers over the last month on strategic planning, and what we're mostly working on is what will our service delivery line look like next July? How should we be planning for that future? Who will not be around in the long run? What service lines make sense? What will be virtual? What will be hybrid? Other sorts of things. So again, strategy really matters from a big picture standpoint. I do like to point out, and if you came to my first presentation about strategic planning, this is a slide just from then. Reopening parts of the country is not recovery. And we've seen this in a actually pretty ugly way in the last few months. You know, businesses starting to open up again or people starting to go back to direct care is not working exactly as we had all hoped. So the reopening stuff is really not recovery. What I'm trying to get y'all to think about is when we get beyond this, what is the picture we should be looking at? You know, who are we? How do we deliver services? You know, leadership has been so important during this time period. I have the most amazing set of CEOs and customers that I work with. Their leadership, and Monica too, making sure we all know how we're going to go forward, you know, beyond the pandemic that we're dealing with. But virtual care and all the technologies that go with that are really part of what I think is going to survive this difficult time. And so I'm working with a number of customers on what does the new model look like? What consumers benefit from virtual care? What consumers need to have face-to-face care? How do we work it out from a staff standpoint? You know, who can work from home? Who do we need offices for? You know, the pandemic has been actually an opportunity for us to figure out how to better care for people and how to be more efficient from our operational standpoint. The last point on this slide, and I think the number is wrong at this point, 20%. I think there's not going to be a lot of providers that don't survive this time period. So we need to understand that from a capacity standpoint to make sure that we're able to deliver care in all the markets that we're working in. I did some work with a New York customer last week, and they expect that 30% of their customers may have trouble meeting their bills in 3 months. So there's a capacity issue that we need to deal with, and there's a financial issue. So, planning is planning. Y'all have done this before. It's changing our mission, our vision, and translating into the high-level objectives that we're doing going forward. It provides clarity for where we're going. And one of the important things that Monica and I have been trying to get across to people is planning now is actually more important than ever, but we need to be very flexible in our planning because the market is changing so rapidly. This is one of my favorite slides. So I do want to look at it for a moment because anytime I'm doing planning, I always tell people there's some pretty obvious things we need to look at. Should we close service lines? Should we improve the financial margin on particular service lines? Do we change a service line to make it more attractable to consumers and payers? Do we expand geographically? Everyone wants to expand their revenue sources. Are we looking for commercial payers, MCOs, other sorts of things? And the last two are really the ones I'm seeing a lot in the last couple of months, which are about, are we big enough? Can we survive the pandemic? Should we be part of a bigger picture to make sure we can fulfill our mission? So these are just common questions that come up when we're doing our planning. So when we do planning, we can mess it all up, even if we have a great plan. So this slide is pretty straightforward. Things that can happen when we're not implementing well. So pretty straightforward. So anyway, I want to get to the implementation part. So I do want to review briefly for those of you who are new to the audience and who didn't see my first presentation. We have a 4-phase model. The first 2 parts are what I call strategic planning. And the second 2 are about implementation and success. My favorite part is this part, the who are we? Let's do a great external analysis. What's going on in the marketplace? Who are our competitors? What do people think about us? And an internal analysis. What are our numbers? The math matters. What makes money? What doesn't make money? What do our staff think of us? Other sorts of things. It's a great sort of SWOT analysis internally and externally. So phase 1 and phase 2 are my favorite parts of the planning process. We do a big external analysis, internal analysis, and then the goal here is to come up with the high-level objectives. What are the 3 to 5 things we're going to do in the next 3 years, 5 years? And how do we make that happen? I had the luxury of just finishing several strategic plans. We ended up with about 15 high-level tactics for the 3 customers I worked with, and they each had 5 or 6 high-level objectives. But the goal here is to look at the big picture, come up with those high-level objectives, and set the slate for what are the initiatives, tactics, we can implement anything, to make that move forward. So again, our open minds notion is you do this phase one, a good internal, external analysis, and then you do a planning session. It's really usually a day to come up with these high level objectives. And then from there, you begin to plan the tactics. So today I'm going to talk about how you make it happen. So, our third phase is the strategy feasibility assessment. And the fourth part is the implementation. So again, let's look at the big picture. We do the high level planning, if you look at my slide here. And then we look at the options in the marketplace. We develop the detailed initiatives, the strategies about how to move forward. And what I really want to focus on today is the how do you make it happen part. There's a budget piece, there's an operational piece, and the high level strategies sometimes change, or the implementation timelines change because of budgets or other sorts of things. All right, so ideally you've all done phase one and phase two. You come up with 3 to 5 high level objectives. We're going to be a center of excellence. We're going to do integrated care. We're going to be a thought leader in our market. It's the high level objectives. From that, we need the list of initiatives or tactics or strategies, whatever you want to call them, about making that happen. When I've been doing this with my favorite customers in the last couple of months, it's not a giant list. It's 15 to 25 high-level initiatives. And what we're doing is we're trying to put together the notion of how we make this happen. Obviously, there are details that need to happen in order to accomplish all those. There's much more detailed planning. So I actually have an example here on my slide. This is from one of my favorite customers. One of their high-level objectives was about integrating care to make sure that they were delivering for the consumers they care, whole person care. It's not just about behavioral health. It was primary care. It was about social determinants of health and other sorts of things. So again, this is just an example, but they came up with 3 very high level initiatives. One was just about access to care, a little more root, I don't know, linear, very straightforward, just making sure that people could call 365 24/7 and get access to care. Number 2 was a little more complicated. How do we make sure that we assess an individual's whole health needs from the beginning, however they come into our organization? And then the third, they were very focused on transitions from one level of care to another, whether it be within their organization or whether it be with other providers. So I'm just trying to show you here a notion of objective, high-level initiatives. Each of these 3 initiatives would have a very detailed plan and a budget that goes with it, because that's how we make it happen from an operational standpoint. So what we do is, when we have our strategic objectives, we have to look at our operational plans. What are the budget plans? What are the plans for each of our business units? How do we make sure we translate the high level objectives down to the budget level? And this is where your executive team and management team really needs to help drive down the detail. If I'm in the tech department, how do I translate our high level objective? If I'm in the clinical department overseeing a particular program, how do I translate that high level plan down to things that we need to do? So again, let's assume we've done a great, external, internal analysis. We've come up with a high level objectives. We have those initiatives, tactics, whatever you want to call them. But we have to translate that. And this is the part that, to be honest, frustrates me with some of the work we do is you have to make it happen. You have to make it realistic. So part of that is translating it down to the budget level. If you have an initiative that's we're going to have 24/7 access to care, well, you have to figure out how you're going to do that. Is it a central call center? Is it other sorts of things? What are the costs associated with that? So the thing we're trying to describe today is you have to go down to the detailed level to make it happen. So again, a simple example here from an imaginary customer, which is they're gonna suddenly have 24/7 access to care. So what does that mean from a budget standpoint? How do we make that happen? Additional staff, office space, equipment, utilities, etc. And the important part here when we're doing our planning and implementation is really doing the budgeting to determine, well, oh, you know what? We can't do that quite yet. That might need to be year 2. Or you know what? We need more investment in order to make this happen because it's critical that we get this, and again, my example, the access to care up and running. So I think my key point today is about translating objectives to operations and active sorts of things. So, determine the costs that are associated with all those initiatives in our plan. And then the trick here is to really look at what can we do this year, what needs to be postponed, what's most important, and does the math work? I have customers who determine that that initiative needs to go into year 2, or you know what, that's critical, but we need to find more funding in for year 1. So it is really an iterative process going back and forth. I do like to point out at the very bottom of my bullet point here, this is where I have found customers who say, you know what? We can't afford this. We don't have the financial ability to do this, and we probably need to partner with folks about that. So that comes up constantly when I'm doing this work with folks, which is, what are our objectives? How much will it cost? Can we afford it? And do we need other resources? So, there are so many, I can't even tell you, there are so many folks I'm working with now where they're trying to decide if they're going to be big enough or have enough financial resources to move forward. So again, phase 3 is the boring math part, about putting together the budget that goes with the strategy. So you have to do that. You have to figure out that piece. And so when we get to, I'm sorry to bounce you through slides here. Get back here, I apologize. So then even if we've done the budgeting and stuff, we have to make it happen. So the most important part here from a strategy standpoint is both the metrics and the operations to make this strategy happen. So, and you've heard Monica and I and other team members talk a lot about key performance metrics. So if we have 5 objectives, how do we measure success? Or how do we measure success on the ops plan to make that happen? So we definitely need to have performance metrics. Here's an example. This is from one of Monica's presentations about the common performance metrics in our domain as providers. But in addition to these broad performance metrics, we need to be thinking about what should it be that we're measuring specifically to our strategic objectives. So whether it's, high performance, speed, consumer experience, clinical stuff and financial, we need to bring metrics into what we're doing. So we create a dashboard of what's important. Some of it is sort of boring, are the tactics being met? Are the timelines being met in terms of our strategic plan? But also we should be looking at, I was just doing this today with a customer here in North Carolina. What are the higher level objectives to in terms of clinical performance, financial performance, and those sorts of things? So we definitely, when you get to phase 4, it's about implementation. So we need metrics to track how well we're doing. And then we need an ops plan to make it happen. With the 3 strategic plans I've done in the last month, they have a dedicated strategic plan officer who's assigned to oversee making sure that we actually deliver on all the details of the plan. So, there's boring details here like, do project management software, do we use Excel or other sorts of things? But very importantly, for the executive team, it's really about making sure timelines are hit and that we have those metrics to make sure we're being successful. So let me go to some sort of key takeaways, and I'd really like to open it up to the audience for discussion. First of all, in Monica, these are Monica's words. When we're doing strategic planning during a pandemic, the world is different. At this point in time, we've all survived from April till now. So you've probably done the stabilization part of making sure you're still caring for consumers and other sorts of things. But again, the top part of this slide is the 2 plans. We need to be thinking about post-pandemic. What are we doing? Who will we be? How do we deliver services? And the other part of this is that the crisis planning part in particular, we do this at Open Minds, it actually changes from week to week as the world shifts. So, when we're thinking about the future, we need to be thinking about what are the things that are going to make money, lose money. How do we preserve our critical assets for long-term success? What are the service lines in our mission and delivery that are going to make a difference in the long run? So before the pandemic, I used to be used to the notion of I was doing 2-year strategic planning. It wasn't a big deal. We come up with a 2-year plan, a 5-year vision. But today, we have to have both. We have the crisis management plan, which is actually adjusted every week, every day, about what's going on in our marketplace. But the big picture is the post-pandemic planning, the recovery plan, which is where are we going to fit in the marketplace? How do we make that happen? And how do we get from here to there? So when we're talking about planning, there's a lot of mistakes we can make. And this is more about implementation. We have to make certainly that our board and our CEO are in alignment. Number 2 is one of the things I run into a lot, which is many people's strategic plan is just another next year's ops plan, what we need to do next. And it's not about the future, about our mission. So, our team works hard to make a difference between the operational plans of things we need to do next year versus a high-level strategic plan. Number 3 is what I've hopefully been talking about today, which is we need to make it happen. 3 and 4. We need to make it happen. What are the details about making it happen? What are the performance metrics? And number 5, what's the budget that goes with that, or how do we need to change that in order to go forward? Number 6 on my slide here is one of the things that I've run into most in the last 6 months is because we're all closed down at this point in time, we tend to think inside our box. We don't, because we're so busy taking care of the crisis, we don't have the time or energy or focus to look outside that picture. So what I'm encouraging you all to do with our help or other people's help is to think beyond where we are. How do we make this happen? What's the picture? Where are we going to be in the marketplace? So there's the strategy part. We do believe there's a whole part that's about innovation, about using, let's figure out how to leverage our technology that we've learned to use in the last few months. What works, what doesn't work, are we serving new populations? Or do we need different partners to make that happen? How do we demonstrate our value as we move forward? So my last slide before I open it up to questions is really our checklist for strategic plan. Develop the strategy. What is our picture of where we're going to be 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now? Figure out, who are we competing with or not competing with, and what's our universal selling proposition, how we make that happen. We need to control costs. We need to make sure we're delivering services that referral sources, individuals and families consider great from a customer preference standpoint, and then push that forward. And sometimes that means collaboration, and collaboration could mean all sorts of things. It could be partnership, it could be mergers, it could be just working together. So that said, my colleague Corey, I've been rambling on for here a while. Do we have questions or chat comments from our friends in the audience?
Yes, Joe, I have a couple questions that have come in. We'll start. The first one comes from Matt. He asks, what are some of the elements we should keep in mind when selecting a dashboard?
Oh, all right. So when I stop showing my screen, I'd like to see humans again. When it comes to a dashboard, this is a very specific thing for all providers. Part of your dashboard should definitely be about the strategic objectives. So part of it could be if we're planning to grow from here to here, it might be a revenue objective. If we're planning to be a center of excellence, it might be about our outcomes or our scores on satisfaction or other sorts of things. But interestingly, I've been working a lot with a couple of customers. There's a whole set of dashboard things we should be looking at. Some of it is financial performance. Some of it is clinical performance, which is about, are we doing good care? And some of it really is about satisfaction. Are people happy with the way we deliver services, how quickly they get into care, those sorts of things. So that, Corey, that's my broad notion.
Thanks, Joe. I have another question, this one from Susan. How much time should we spend on market research to support a new strategy? How long should we plan before we implement? Is there a best practice window for launch of the plan?
The external analysis is the outside part when you're doing planning. I mean, seriously, 2 months or less. You know, what are the environmental factors? What's happening in your local market? You know, who are your competitors, potential partners? What's your brand recognition? I do often do either focus groups or qualitative interviews to sort of figure out how people look at us if we're a provider, what are the key issues. But, you know, seriously, 2 months is a lot of time to gather that information. What we want to know from the outside is, where do we fit in? What do people think about us? What's happening in the marketplace, so we can plan going forward.
Thanks, Joe. Next question. Misalignment between the board and the CEO is often standard. Launching a new strategy during a crisis adds even more stress. What are some of the keys to selling the new strategy during less than normal times?
That's a harder question for you. The thing that I had found out after, you know, 20 years at Open Minds or so is boards of directors are very different. You know, and we have our El Paso customer where their board is assigned. You know, we have our Kentucky customer where they choose the board. So part of the complexity is the, you know, how a CEO, you know, how she works with our board of directors and what it means. Sometimes the board is deeply involved, sometimes they're more advisory. But when it comes to this high-level planning, what I'm typically used to is that, you know, whatever the involvement of the board is in the planning process, I'm used to the CEO that she'll go and she'll, you know, present the high-level plan and get approval for it. But it, you know, it really does vary because there are boards that are much more involved. And that's the trick between the CEO and the board, because the board is supposed to be about governance, not management. You know, so their role is to approve the high-level plan, and that the CEO, she makes it move forward. But it's not always that case, depending on the provider and what their relationship is with the board.
Thanks, Joe. I do believe we've run out of questions that have come in. I would like to remind everybody on the side of the right-hand side of your screen, there's a question box, and please submit if you have anything you would like Joe to cover.
Well, it seems we don't have more questions, Corey and Mina, but to the attendees and the folks that are watching this offline, once we submit it to our website, do keep in mind we're here. So when it comes to taking strategy implementation, we're here. If you have questions, you know, drop me an email, drop Monica or other of my team members' emails, because the most important part is not only doing a good strategy, but making it happen. And so that was my goal today, to talk about, you know, how you make it happen, putting the boring details together, having metrics, and then moving forward and making it happen. So we're glad to help you in any way possible, and certainly you know, I'd be glad to chat with anyone who's in the audience today. Just give me a call.
Thanks, Joe. Sounds great. I actually have a question for you. We're hearing a lot about expanding geographies and adopting strategies that take into account moving into markets where other provider organizations have recently left, or expanding through mergers and acquisitions. Now, these are both things that have happened before the pandemic. Is there something that's changed from a strategy standpoint that CEOs should keep in mind if they're going to explore, say, a merger or acquisition today versus 12 months ago?
Well, and thanks, Corey, for the question. One of the main things we've seen is they changed all the rules, you know, so that providers can deliver services across state lines. There's recognition of licensing and other sorts of things. So from a competition standpoint, what we're certainly seeing is now it's wide open. You know, if I'm a provider in Nashville, Tennessee, I can deliver services elsewhere, and the licensing is, you know, it's respected, so I can get, you know, I can get paid to deliver those services. So, you know, one of the major things we're seeing at Open Minds is not only, you know, people looking at M&A kind of stuff, but the fact that, oh, wow, you know, I can deliver services in Washington State or Texas or other sorts of places. And we don't, at Open Minds, we don't think those rules, and again, we might be wrong, but we don't think those rules are going to change post-pandemic. So we do believe that now the opportunity and the threat is that competition may be coming from anywhere. You know, if I'm a provider in Nashville, I can provide services in Alaska. You know, I can provide services here in my hometown in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. The license, the, you know, the payment systems, everything has recognized during the pandemic that we can do that. So it's, you know, I consider it an enormous opportunity for providers who are financially doing okay, but it's also a threat because other people could come into our market and deliver services virtually.
Joe, I want to thank you again. I would like to thank everybody else who attended today's webinar. And I want to remind you that starting tomorrow, the slides and this recording will both be available on the Open Minds website. Thanks again, and we'll be in touch about upcoming web forums soon.
Great. Well, listen, everyone, be well. Let us know if you need our help. Take care.